who is instrumental in helping us in what we've been talking about, which is setting up Muslims to understand how Islam is to be practiced and lived and to influence the society that we're in. What makes it relevant for these times? How is it still authentic and rooted in our tradition? In order to do this, we need to have people who are educated, people who are intellectuals, and the Islamic Seminary is leading in that effort, and he is leading in the Islamic Seminary, so we're honored to have him today. Certainly a friend, a guest, a family member of Masjid al-Islam. Masjid al-Islam's around the world, but specifically here in Dallas, Texas. Today's conversation is inspired by a book called Disintegration by Eugene Robinson. And so we're going to talk about how the changing dynamic of the black community and where is it going from here and how we connect to that as a Muslim community to really take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of us. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jimmy Jones.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, kathiran. I want to thank the leadership of Masjid al-Islam for inviting me here again. They always are open to hearing from myself in my individual capacity and also as a representative of the Islamic Assembly of America. As Imam said, I'm the Executive Vice President of the Islamic Assembly of America. I'm also a professor of comparative religion and culture there, so I teach courses. And that one of the things I'm doing is going to different Islamic centers and talking to them about some of the things that happen in our classroom. We call this BAB, the Leading Academic Bookshelf, Book Talks. BAB, the Leading Academic Leading Academic Bookshelf, Book Talks. Why do we call it this? We call it BAB simply because our nickname that was given to us by Dean Yasafadi is that we're leading academics. If we had a basketball team or a football team, we have neither. We would call ourselves a leading academic. That's because what we do in our classroom is based on our belief in La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah, and we also are academically rigorous as an institution. And so this BAB initiative, this Believing Academic Bookshelf, came out of a wish from some of our staff people says, what can we do in the run-up to Ramadan that is to be helpful to the community? Because so many people are doing so many things. I know some things are happening here at Masjid al-Islam, around the Islamic centers, but we thought that this is something we could offer. For many of us, of course, our focus is on Quran for the whole month of Ramadan, as it should be. But for others of us, sometimes we go to that pile of books that we said we really want to take a look at. And so we thought we would add to that pile of books by saying, look, these are some books that we found useful in the classroom that we think that the, quote, average Muslim should have on his or her bookshelf, and that if they wanted to, during Ramadan, they could take a look at these books. And most of our books are connected to a course, and this book, Disintegration, the Splintering of Black America by Eugene Robinson, is connected to a course, Navigating Muslim American Identities and Cultures. Navigating Muslim American Identities and Culture. One of the reasons that we have this course is that because we in the Muslim American community often find it very, very difficult to navigate Muslim identities and cultures. What I mean by that is that sometimes we don't understand where we fit individually in the American landscape. That's number one. And number two, we don't understand how we should interact given the racial dynamics that we find here in the United States. And that's what I mean, that we find here in the United States, because many of us, if you immigrated here or you were born here, you'll find racial dynamics that are extremely, extremely different from the racial dynamics of the founding community of our beloved Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. I would recommend that you just grab a Sirah book and look at the companions, and you'll see that if this was a community, that is the community of our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, if it were around today, it would be banned by the government because they would look at it and say, this must be because of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Because it was a diverse community, and some of you know better than it was an equitable community, that is, nobody was higher than anybody else because of race. And our beloved Prophet, والسلام, he made this point in his farewell talk. And this is in a society that was what we call tribalistic. So it was diverse, it was equitable, and it was inclusive. If you believed in La ilaha illallah, it didn't matter where you came from, what country you came from, what ethnicity you had, whether you're male or female, whether you're young or old. Go back and look it up. You'll see that you were welcome in the founding community of what we call al-Islam, of our beloved Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Unfortunately, somewhere along the lines, we've lost our way. Because when we look around at many of our communities in the United States and Canada today, you'll find that, by the way, I want to say there's no problem with having a masjid or Islamic center that's predominantly one thing or another. The problem is that if someone else comes from the outside, they feel uncomfortable there. That is, in a way that makes them feel like an outsider. I've been to Masjid al-Islam here in Dallas enough to know that's not the situation, because people literally from around the world come to Jummah. People literally from around the world participate in the feeding program at the Beacon of Light. And so this is this kind of understanding that we are a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community is something that Masjid al-Islam here in Dallas embraces. Unfortunately, far too many of our Islamic centers and our masjids don't embrace this in the United States. And it doesn't matter what the background, whether it's so-called immigrant communities or indigenous communities, we'll find that if you're not from that community, when you walk in the door, you won't feel welcome. You feel like you're an outsider, and this is not the ethos that our beloved Prophet ﷺ left us with. And so this course that we have at the Islamic Center of America, Navigating Muslim American Identities and Cultures, is an attempt to get our students who are Masters of Arts in Islamic Studies and Masters in Divinity to understand the concepts that we often get caught up, and so we can navigate them as leaders and as thought leaders and institutional leaders. And so this book, Disintegration, The Splintering of Black America, is a book that I believe, as one of the instructors in this course, because it's a team-taught course, there's several of us that teach it, I believe helps people understand some of the issues that we find in the United States of America. So I think one of the things that we need, one of the things that we do at the beginning of the course, and I'll just explain it to you. I was going to do it, but since we're live streaming, it would be very awkward, is that at the beginning of this course, we do something called SAGA, S-A-G-A. And I would invite you to do it in your mind. So we ask the students in the course, who are, quote, your people? We ask the students in the course, who are, quote, your people? Your people, however you identify yourself, culturally speaking. The amazing thing about this, not everybody goes where you think they'll go with it, but most of us, when we ask this question, will attach a place to it. I'm Bengali American, I'm African American, I'm Irish American, I'm Polish American. But we say to people, identify yourself the way you would identify yourself, not the way the United States Census Bureau identifies you, not the way your family identifies you, not the way people who hurl racial slurs at you. How would you identify yourself? And I'd invite people watching streaming and people in the audience to think about that. The second thing is, where did your people's story start? Where would you begin? And I'm going to ask a couple of people to share that with me. So who are here. First of all, the question is, who are your people, culturally speaking? And it doesn't have to be an ethnic group. But some people, they identify culturally with their whatever job they have. My people are social workers. That's okay. But if you were left to your own devices, how would you identify your people? And when I say culturally, where do you draw your ethos from? Where do you draw your ideology from? Where do you draw your norms from? And so I'm asking people here, and I'm going to ask you to volunteer, a couple of you to volunteer what they think, to think about who are your people. If I was to ask you culturally, who are your people, what would you say? The second question I want you to think about is, where did the story of your people begin? Whomever they are, where did the story of your people begin? And then the third is a word or a phrase that describes the current condition of your people. The word or a phrase to describe the current condition of the people. I'm going to go over it again. Give you a chance to think. I want just a couple of people to give me an example. Is that, first of all, I want folks here who are with me at Master Islam to say, who are your people, in quotes, culturally speaking. Secondly, where did the story of your people begin? That's where the word saga comes from. Saga is a long story, right? And if you had to choose a word or a phrase to identify your people, what would that be? So, can I get a volunteer to tell me who their people are? Where did their people's story start? And what word or phrase would they use to identify their people? The current situation. Any volunteers? Yes.
I'll volunteer.
Sure.
So culturally, I identify with African American.
Culturally African American. And where did the story of the African American begin?
And I would begin the story of the African American in West Africa.
West Africa.
I don't know when I would date it, but I wouldn't begin the story here in America. But that's where the saga extended to.
Right. And if you had to give me a word or a phrase that describes the current condition of African Americans in the United States today, what word or phrase would that be?
Well,
trying to be nice.
I would say we're in trouble.
In trouble. I would think so. Could I get another volunteer? Yes.
The sister.
Oh, sister. Yes.
When I think of our people, I think of people searching for knowledge and clear understanding of why we're here. And causes me to know people from all around the world who come.
Okay, let me just, for the people who are streaming, repeat what you said. There's a sister here who says, her people, culturally speaking, are people searching for knowledge.
Of the Creator.
Of knowledge of the Creator, okay? And where did the story of these people begin? In your saga, this is your saga.
Yeah.
So this is not a test. This is what your concept of your people. Where did this story begin? If you say, well, my people are the people who are seeking knowledge for the Creator, where did this story begin?
I guess it's, I'm inspired by the people who have come into this deen of Islam, but you meet people that are God conscious along the way who have such a passionate yearning to please God, and that touches my heart.
I hear that. So she's telling me why, and I'm asking her her story. Where did the story of your people, those people searching for knowledge of God, where did it begin? In your head, this is not a test. I mean, it's really about how you think about yourself and how connected you are to particular people. So give me your people are people who seek the knowledge of God. Where would you pinpoint the story of your people beginning?
I guess it began in Ohio
In Ohio.
for me.
For you. Okay. In Ohio, mashallah. And if you had to give me a word or a phrase, I got in trouble from the imam, right, of African Americans. But if you had to give me a word or a phrase that characterizes your people, current status right now in 2025, 1460 for us after Hijra, what word or phrase would you use? What word or phrase would you use, sister? I'm talking to you. If you had to use a word or phrase, and this is not a test, right?
Searching for God.
Right. This is just your notion of where your people are. Those people that you identify with, those people seeking the knowledge of God, what word or phrase would you use to identify them 1416 or 2025?
Yes.
I can't hear you.
Passionate.
Passionate.
They're passionate.
Alhamdulillah. So the people, your people, are the people who are searching for knowledge of the Creator. Alhamdulillah. And the story began for you in Ohio, and you see them as passionate. Could I have one more? Because I'm trying to make a point here. Just one more? Yes.
I think I'm gonna go a little different from the last two speakers because of where I was raised up
Okay.
in a small place where you didn't get that much education, and from my mother wasn't that educated,
Okay.
and so my answer to what you were saying would be the only people that I know was my family, my immediate family.
So culturally speaking,
Culturally speaking,
is my family.
yeah, it's my family.
Okay.
So
and when did the story of your family start?
well, it started when I was able to understand something about family.
Right. When you
So
were
I
very young.
had to be, I would say maybe 7 or 8 years old.
Okay. And
And
go ahead. Sorry.
so that was my closest family.
Yeah.
That's the family that I know about. I didn't know no family. I had family in other
Someplace
countries,
else, yeah.
other places. So that's the family I was raised up familiar with.
So if you had to give me a word or a phrase that identifies the status of your family in 2025 or 1416 for us as Muslims, what would that word or phrase be?
I would say not having a broad understanding that you had a bigger family.
Right. I like that. Not having a broad, that's a phrase. Not having a broad understanding that you had a bigger family. So 1 is in trouble. 2, we have a passionate. 3, not having a broad understanding. I'll take one more. I saw a hand over here.
Assalamu
Alaikum assalam.
I would say, what was the first question? I'm sorry.
First question, who are, quote, your people, culturally speaking, as you understand them?
I would say who my people are, culturally speaking, are the people that landed here in North America. Those are my people.
From
the ships.
From the ships?
Yes, that landed here in North America.
With enslaved people?
Yes.
All right.
That's where my people started.
All right. And when did that story of your people start?
It started then, and then it went on to David Walker. It went on to Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. Those people that were speaking out against injustice, racial equality, those type of things.
And if you had to give me a word or phrase that characterizes those people who landed as enslaved people in the United States, who had quite a saga here, in 2025 or 1416 for us Muslims, what word or phrase would you attach to those people?
The phrase that I believe for me is best is newly covenanted. We newly have a new covenant.
We have a new covenant.
Yes,
Alhamdulillah.
that's the
You want to
first
say
time.
a little bit about that because it's not obvious.
Well, a covenant is something that
It's an agreement.
between you and your creator.
MashaAllah.
And from that lineage,
Alhamdulillah.
they made that agreement way back then once we landed on these shores.
Alhamdulillah.
So we're from that lineage.
I like that. Alhamdulillah. All right. So this is one of the ways we start our class, navigating navigating Muslim American cultures and identities. Even with people who quote look alike, we often have different cultural identities in our head. You follow me? Because in this case, the people that spoke looked like they were culturally the same, but each one, all four of them, approached the issue of culture very, very differently. And so we act as if, because we look alike, we have the same cultural understanding, right? So the thing about this is that what we do when we act that way is what we do is essentialize culture as if it's one thing and that everybody has to fit in the same cultural bag. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that one of the first things we see in the class is that you have no control over how other people see you. These four people see themselves in a particular way, but if they walk out on the streets of Dallas, somebody will see them and identify them very differently from the way they identify themselves. That's one part. The second thing is that what we do before this is a prelude in getting to the book, is that we talk about culture as learned behavior, which is characteristic of a group of people that is not the result of biology. Culture is learned behavior, which is characteristic of a group of people that is not the result of biology. Even though we talk as if it's the result of biology, and let me just tell you what I mean very briefly because we need to get to the book, is that biologically and Quranically speaking, there's only one race. Biologically and Quranically speaking, there's only one race. We human beings, whether United States or Germany or Brazil, we act as if there are many races. And I start troubling here, right? But biologically speaking and Quranically speaking, there's only one race. Quran first, right? Surah An-Nisa, right? O humanity, reverence your God and Lord who created you, right? O humanity, it's not, it's not, O you believers. O humanity, reverence your God and your Lord who created you from one being, and that's right, created you from one being, and from that being created his mate, and from the two of them spread countless men and women throughout the earth. I have one of our alums here. He's a Quran specialist. I hope I'm translating that correctly because he knows Quran much better than I am. Michael Wolfen, that he just graduated from TISA. But my point is that from the Quran's perspective, my understanding is that everybody here and everybody streaming, we had one common ancestor, right? We had one common ancestor. We Muslims say Bani Adam, right? But we have one common ancestor. That is not the way we act, desegregation, right? It's not the way we act. The notion of family, I think, except maybe the brother who talked about a notion of family being broader than his own family, that might be a broadening out to all humanity, all right? So that's the Quranic viewpoint. That's the end of the story, right? When Allah Ta'ala says, "O humanity, reverence your God and Lord, who created for one person, and from one person made," right? So that's the end of the story. The Quran says that's the source of knowledge for us. Even people like Richard Dawkins, D-A-W-K-I-N-S, is what I call a rabid, R-A-B-I-D, like the dog, right? I'm not calling Dawkins a dog, but he's a rabid atheist. The reason I call him a rabid atheist, he's always attacking us, those people who are believers. and he's making fun of us. If you Google him, he's always making fun of us, and that he says the things that he believes are based on facts and science, and we're just making it up. But that we'll leave it aside for the moment. But when he writes books like The River Out of Eden, he argues that all human beings who are on the face of the earth right now, and Dawkins is what's called a Darwinian biologist, right? Charles Darwin, how many people have heard of Charles Darwin, right? The origin of the species, right? He's a Darwinian biologist, right? So he is a scientific guy, and he says that all the people on the face of the earth right now are cousins, right? Because they all have a common ancestor. Since this is Black History Month, this is a time to remind us their common ancestors from Africa, right? So their common ancestors generally agreed in the scientific community as being from Africa. It's seen differently. It's not the same narrative as in the Quran, of course, right? But the reality is the notion is that there's only one race, because we act as if that people who are from what we call different races are really different species from us. We really do. I mean, we don't have time to go into that because I need to get to the book. But I'm just saying this is a prelude. This is the kinds of things that we cover in our class at the Islamic Center of America, trying to understand these things and trying to produce leaders who understand the nuances and how we get caught in what people call the trick bag of racial animosity between us. And so when you look at this, you'll see that race is a cultural construct, really, and its culture is learned behavior, characteristics of a group of people, not the result of biology. And so, as I said, the point to understand is that there are no such thing as races, as we say, as if somebody, the Asian race, the Indian race. I mean, we have all kinds of things called race, because one thing we know about species, right, is that when we know a species, what little biology I remember from long ago in high school, is that the way we know that someone is from, or entity is from a different species, is their inability to mate. Reality is that all these people who are from these different races, if they're grown and they're healthy, and we prefer them to be married because we're Muslim, they could procreate. All right, so that's the background, sort of how we open the course. Let's get to this book. Okay, what I'm going to do, this book is called Disintegration, Splintering of Black America, and it was published in 2010. Eugene Robinson is the author, and Eugene Robinson is a prize-winning newspaper reporter. At least he was. I'm not sure. I haven't checked recently. The Washington Post, which is a nationally, internationally known newspaper. And Disintegration, the Splintering of Black America, when I read that, it was an eye-opener for me in understanding the racial dynamics in the United States and within the Black community. I think if you take a look at this book, and again, we recommend it from the Believing Academic Bookshelf as a way of thinking about this racial problem here in the United States, because the reality is how you construct the problem. This is something we teach in the classroom. The way you conceive of a problem will begin to dictate how you solve the problem going forward. And so if you look at this book, one of the sort of, when I first read the book, one of the things that was shocking to me is that the title of the first chapter, and we really are going to deal only with the first chapter because of time, is the title of the first chapter shocked me a bit. The title of the first chapter is that Black America doesn't live here anymore. I said, what? Black America doesn't live here anymore. Now, I know that people in the United States would like for this to be true. But I'm saying, what is this guy talking about? He's black, Eugene Robinson is black. He's talking about Black America doesn't live here anymore. Let me lay out the theory here. Maybe people can confront it for me. The way I remember this is a little ditty that I made up. 40, 60, 25, 4, Black America doesn't live in here anymore. Okay, so what does 40, 60, 25, 4 mean when you say Black America doesn't live here anymore? So the thesis and Professor Wolfman, who just came back from teaching the course, that's why I call him Professor Michael and I. One of the things that we try to do in our classroom is define our terms. What are you talking about, right? So, and so what Robinson is doing is trying to lay the groundwork for his understanding, and this is in 2010, right? This is a while ago, the state of Black America. He said Black America doesn't live anymore. So what do you mean by this? He says 40 years, this is 40 years, he published this in 2010. That's the 40 years ago. 60%, that's the 60, right? 60% of the Black community lived at or near the poverty level. So 40 years, if you subtract mathematicians from 2010 going back, what's 40 years before 2010?
1970.
1970s, right? So 40 years, right, before he published this book, 60% of the Black community lived at or near the poverty level. And by the way, this is based on census data. This is not him sitting somewhere and looking into a crystal ball and making it up. It's based on census data. You can go and look at the census data for yourself, right? So that's the 40 and the 60. Fast forward to 2010, right? That number drops to 25%. I want you to think about that for a moment. 40 years prior to the publishing of this book, 60% up, and many of us were alive, not all of us were alive, many of us were alive at that time. I lived in one of those families. The family I grew up in was at or near the poverty level. Of course, I didn't know it. I was raised in Roanoke, Virginia. I would have shoes, newspaper in my shoes and all that. I thought everybody had newspaper in shoes. I thought it was the style. I didn't know I was poor until I grew up, right? So, right. So it's time to get a new pair of shoes, but in the meantime, I put some newspaper in them. But my family lived at or near the poverty levels in 1970 and the 60s, right? So that was the vast majority of us who were African Americans in the United States. Go to 2010, that number drops to 25%. Here's the point here. What I'm not saying is that over those 40 years, racism went away. What I'm not saying is that over those 40 years, white supremacy went away. What I am saying, and what Robinson is saying, is that the social cultural makeup, the social, cultural, and economic makeup of the Black community changed dramatically during that time period. Because when you go from 60% of your people at or near the poverty level down to 25%, this is a different community. Would you say that? This is a different community. It's not the same. People even today talk as if we're back in the 1970s, 1960s, that most African Americans are at or near the poverty level. And it's just simply not true if you believe the census data. So 40, 60, 25, 40. 40, 60, and 25 means 40 years ago, before the book was published, 60% of African Americans lived or at the poverty level. And in 2010, it dropped to 25. So what does he mean that Black America doesn't live here anymore? See, he says instead of one Black America, he argues in 2010, we're going to give you a chance to respond to this. Instead of one Black America, he says there are 4. Instead of one Black America, he argues that 40 years ago, when you said Black America, you pretty much were talking about a group of people who were primarily living at or near the poverty level. And their outlook on life in the United States was very, very similar. Fast forward to 2010, this is what he argues, and it's based on census data, that there are 4. The largest one are a mainstream middle-class majority. SubhanAllah. Now, this doesn't mean that all of a sudden, all black Americans are well off. These middle class, to be a middle class black American is not the same as being a middle class white American. And if you look at the data, you'll find that what white Americans have, the income might have come up, but the wealth, right, the amount of savings, the amount of property you have hasn't changed. But he says this is a mainstream middle class majority, and again, go look at the census data. So but he says something else about this group that I want to test out with you, and I want you to say whether or not you agree with it. He says this is a mainstream, middle class majority that I will read his words, and I want you to react to them. He says he argues that the majority of us, based on census data, are now middle class, not as stable economically as white middle class, but middle class. And he says, with a full ownership stake in American society. How does that sound to you? These are Robinson's words.
We're not in trouble. We're moving on up.
There you got it. That's what he's saying. He said we're not in trouble. Robinson said we're not in trouble. We are moving on up economically.
She asked you, was he dead?
Huh?
She asked you, was he dead?
Oh,
Was he
Robinson?
Yeah.
Why? Was he dead?
That's what she is, somebody
Right,
like
right.
that.
No, Robinson is, I think, very much alive. And let me tease out his argument and see what you think about it. As I understand it, is that when you move from being at or near the poverty level, and you move into getting more education, because this group is more educated than black Americans were 40, 50 years ago, and you move into home ownership, and you move out of the inner city, which many people did, which turns out I didn't, but which many people did, your outlook on American society is different, and he argues, with a full ownership stake in American society. Pushback, difference of opinion, anybody want to say anything about that?
I agree personally. I think my grandparents, I wouldn't want to go back to my grandparents. I think we're in a better position in every aspect to have better opportunities.
So one of our people here, for the people who stream, he said, I agree personally. I don't want to go back to where my grandparents were. That would be like me, right? Where my grandparents were. He feels that we have better opportunities than they have. Anybody want to push back? Yeah?
Well, I got to push back because if I can say, when our ancestors become more free people in this country, they had land, you know. I mean, they was farmers.
Yep.
You know, they know how to take care of themselves. If you want to push it 50 years further, I mean, we don't even take care of ourselves now. We're just consumers now.
Yep.
You see, so that's a big difference in that to me.
So the pushback
Yeah.
is that 50, 60 years ago, or further back, really, there's a whole thing about this dispossession of black farmers' land. There's a whole thing about this, that we were less dependent on the broader society than we are today. We are what, Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, junkies. Well, I'm not gonna say that, don't put it like that. But the point is that when you live off the land, you're less dependent. You know, I have relatives who live in Alabama, and when I go visit them, they, you know, the kinds of things we would think about, like going to the store, I mean, they grew a significant amount of their food, and they grew a significant amount of their livestock, and they ate off the land. That's very different. So the pushback is that, yeah, on paper, right, we have more money, but we're more dependent, and we're more consumers, yes.
So I'm thinking of a couple things. One of the things you alluded to, even though many more African Americans or black Americans have moved into the middle class, they still haven't really close the gap
Absolutely.
between black middle class and white middle class.
Right.
That gap is
It's
probably
wide.
wider
Right.
than it was.
Absolutely.
And so that raises a question. It's more like the rise in economic status mainly reflects how they say a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
Like some of us are doing better because the American economy may be stronger, be doing better. But while it's the case that we may have more material success, I question our spiritual improvement or growth that's happened over the 40, 50 years. Have we been elevating ourselves and growing and developing spiritually? Or what I would argue, why I say we're in trouble, are we more as a whole degenerating spiritually?
Now, this is the kind of conversation that we have in TISA class. Professor Michael and I just left a class for college students, which we teach, called Fundamentals of Prophetic Principles, where just the same issue was raised by one of the students. The issue was raised, and they quoted Martin Luther King in the Muslim classroom. They were all Muslims in the classroom, which the Martin Luther King quote was something like, "We're scientifically advanced, but spiritually backwards." And I think that's the point you're making, right?
Guided missiles, misguided men.
We, as Professor Michael said, with guided missiles, Martin Luther King always could turn a phrase, with guided missiles and misguided men. So these are the kind of conversations, we're not going to linger anymore. This is the kind of conversation we have in our classroom. You know, are we really? I mean, we're not trying to make one right and one wrong. We're trying to get people to think critically about our situation. If you're going to be a leader, you need to do that. Let's move on to the second one. So the first one is this middle class. The second is a large abandoned minority. That's that 25%, remember? The 25%, and more than 60%, large abandoned minority. I want your reaction to what Robinson says about them. He says it's a large abandoned minority with less hope of escaping poverty and dysfunction than at any time since Reconstruction's crushing in. Let me read that again. Right, first, the largest group are these middle class people. The second group is this large abandoned minority with less hope of escaping poverty and dysfunction than at any time since Reconstruction's crushing in. That's kind of heavy stuff, right? In other words, what he's saying is, okay, a bunch of y'all have gotten better, the majority of you have gotten better, but that 25%, not only are they still there, he's saying there's less hope of them getting out of there, poverty and dysfunction, than at any time since Reconstruction. That's kind of heavy assessment. What do folks think about that? Is it that bad? These group of people, they're small, right? They're a small group of people, but we didn't have this 60 or 70 years ago. And let's go to the fourth one, so we'll wrap up in a minute. So the fourth are two newly emerging groups. That's what he calls it. I'm quoting him. All of this is in chapter 1. And he says the first one is individuals of mixed race heritage. Right? So what is the difference between individuals of mixed race heritage in the 70s and individuals of mixed race heritage in 2010? One big difference is the 1963 Supreme Court case called Lovings versus Virginia. Anybody know this case? Yeah.
It's a movie about it.
Hmm? What was it about?
I'm saying it's a movie about it.
There's a movie about it. What is it about?
The right to marry.
The right to marry. Right.
Yes.
Virginia, the state that I grew up in, right, had miscegenation laws.
Yes.
Miscegenation laws. By the way, Virginia, I'm not going to go off on this tangent, but I grew up in Virginia, right? So it had laws that they lock you up, and they locked the Lovings up, L-O-V-I-N-G-S. What a name, right? And these were not They were not active. If you read their story, the Lovings were not activists. They weren't out here, oh, I want to get married. No. This were average black woman, average white man. I want you to think about that for a moment. They weren't trying to make a statement. They were just in love. You get me? They weren't trying to make a political statement. I just want to live with my wife. This is the woman I married. If you watch it, they're just ordinary people. They're not trying to march up and down. They're not trying to break the racial barrier. They were locked up. They had to leave the state of Virginia. State of Virginia is something else. State of Virginia, I got to say this about state of Virginia, right? I was raised in Virginia. State of Virginia was one of the leading states to impose eugenics on its people. Anybody know what the word eugenics means? What does it mean?
Population control.
Population control. Eugenics is the science of improving the race. It's a science behind it. How many people have ever had Kellogg's cornflakes? Ever eaten Kellogg's cornflakes? Mm-hmm. John Kellogg devised this during the eugenics movement, trying to make a white super race. I mean, no wonder you feel different after you No, this is history. This is not conspiracy theory. This is history. During the eugenics movement, this really is a tangent. Michael knows I just go off on tangents, and we need to finish this. But really, they used to have at fairs like they have. They would have blue ribbon pigs, right, and cows at fairs. They would have blue ribbons for families, right? Because they were concerned about having the right kind of white family. They would have, go and look, you can't make this stuff up. There's a PBS movie special called Eugenics and the whole kind of thing. And the reason Virginia took a case to the Supreme Court, and it's called Buck versus Bell in 1927. And it was about this young girl from Charlottesville, not far, I was raised in Roanoke, from Charlottesville, Virginia, who they wanted to declare incompetent and they wanted to sterilize her. Young white girl, by the way. They wanted to sterilize her. And you know what? In 1927, the Supreme Court, Oliver Wendell Holmes, who's ever heard of him? Oliver Wendell Holmes, right? He said, famously, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough, and he said it's okay to sterilize her, because this is where they thought that it was because of genetics that people were lazy and they were alcoholic and all this kind of thing. So the point is that the state of Virginia, took this all the way to the Supreme Court, right? And they won. As a result, over 70,000 Americans were sterilized under the color of law between 1927 and 1970.
Wow.
This is history. There's a book about it called The War Against the Weak. Last name is Black. The War Against the Weak. It's a 600-page book. We don't need any conspiracy theories. You understand? All we have to do is study history. You don't need to make up stuff, right? This actually happened, wherein 70,000 people were sterilized. What state do you think sterilized the most people in this city? What state?
Mississippi.
No.
What, Virginia?
Mississippi.
No.
Gotta be.
California.
What?
No way.
Knows how to party.
California sterilized because the do-gooders. You gotta understand. I'm way off here. You gotta understand the eugenics movement was about improving the race. Up in New Haven, near Yale, where I live, one of the major headquarters for the eugenics movement was at Yale University. These are liberal do-gooders at Stanford University. They were teaching eugenics in the classroom, right? This is history. This is not something made up. They were teaching eugenics in the classroom. And the thing to understand about this is this was an attempt to develop a master race in the United States of America. The Nazis will tell you that they learned what they learned in order to do the Holocaust from the United States. That's what they'll tell you. Because they did learn some of it from the United States. Anyway, I'm I'm off topic here. Anyways, so individuals of mixed race heritage, were, it was up until, yeah, and I should be wrapping up, right? The individuals of mixed race heritage were up until Loving versus Virginia. It was against the law. And so the point is that since then, since Supreme Court did that, many more people have gotten married. And so, how many people know the one drop rule? One drop of black blood makes you black, right? So no matter who you marry, Koreans, Italians, it don't matter. You black, right? So individual mixed race heritage, that's one group. And then the other group, I'm gonna wrap this up, the fourth group, is communities of recent black immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean who make us wonder what black is even supposed to mean. Why? Because culturally speaking, these people, who are many of our family members, by the way, married African Americans and that kind of stuff, but they're from the Caribbean, they're from Nigeria, they're from Ghana, you get it? They're from Somalia, they're from Sudan, right? But, follow me here, and I'm gonna stop after this because I'm gone on for a while. Follow me here. Socially, culturally speaking, they're not the same as me. Right? In other words, their ancestors were never enslaved, right? They never went through Jim Crow, right? They never, in Ghana, they didn't have it, right? They never went through that. It's not saying there's something wrong with them, but socially, culturally speaking, and there are people who call themselves Jamaicans, Americans, right? And they don't even, many of them don't even want to be associated with us because they feel like a lot of us are lazy, and Jamaicans have a reputation for being hard workers. And so these are the four, and I'm going to stop. But the point is that this book is the kind of book that will open your eyes to the kind of dynamics and the things that we think about Black America. And again, the way you frame a problem often sets up how you deal with it. So I should wrap up now. Any questions, comments before we wrap up for the day? Yes.
Assalamu alaikum.
Well, it makes sense.
When you spoke about like the history of genetics and quality genetics, I studied the destruction of the Egyptian dynasties of the North and Southern, and it said they left behind pictures and structures of like half human, half animals type structures of supposed to be they theory of superhumans. But they were cursed through and right now from wars and diseases, but people rejected that ideology.
Okay.
And then it got speaking on the history of Sudan and all the stuff that's going on in the African country right now with tribalism ideology. And it was saying that like when an African tribe conquered another African tribe, the first people they assassinated was the men and boys, but kept the women for population reasons. And so when you said that about here in America, this been going on throughout history. Cross genes and trying to form a tribal people or human to conquer other people. Because it was saying in the book, there was fascinated over warriors trying to create this great warrior.
Okay. So
And
I'm going to cut you off because African history is really not my thing. But I got two books for you, right? I always got a book. One book is called Islam, Christianity, and the Negro Race, which was published, I want to say in 1830 by an African nationalist who happened to be a Christian. And what he talks about is that everywhere in Africa, at that time, he was a Christian missionary, everywhere in Africa you go and you find Christianity, you find servility, and everywhere you went and you found Islam, you found a proud people. I recommend that book. The other book I would recommend that really flies in the face of the African narrative, particularly in Islam, is a book called Beyond Timbuktu. Beyond Timbuktu. What is the book about? The book is about the rich and varied written heritage of Islamic manuscripts on the African continent. When we think of Africa, we think of people who are illiterate, who can't write, and we think of Tarzan. I grew up with Tarzan. Oh, he's the only white guy, and he's the king. What? That's what I grew up with. And what I'm saying, the reason I'm suggesting this book, when you read this book, you see the history of the many universities that were established in Africa, and the thousands of Arabic manuscripts written by Africans, right? Because we think of Africans as being oral. And so I think my response to you is be careful about one African narrative, because Africa is, first of all, Africa is bigger than the United States. It doesn't look like on the map. And Africa is not a country, obviously. It's not one thing, you know, and West Africa is not all of Africa, if you understand what I'm saying. And this is something, my wife and I, we're on a family thing where we read Quran every morning. One of the things we were talking about, I think it was this morning, that if you look at the history of Christianity and Islam, you'll find in the history of Christianity and Islam that one of the first places that Islam and Christianity was established was in Africa. I mean, this is not made up, right? The Hijra to Abyssinia, right? Africa, right? And Christianity is so. What I'm saying is, I don't know about what you're talking about, but what I do understand is that we have this way of making it one narrative about Africa, which when Africa, mashallah, has had a rich, and it's not Wakanda, by the way. Don't get me started about, you know, the Black Panther anyway. We got 54 countries on the African continent, which most of us know nothing about, and we have to invent another one, Wakanda forever. No, please, that's good. All right, sorry. Yeah, I'll take one more and we'll close. Are we done?
I see no hands. I see no hands.
I see no hands. Alhamdulillah. Thank you for your invitation. I hope this was beneficial to you. Our reason for doing this is to try to spread some of the information that we have in our classroom. We recommend this book. It's not a very expensive book if you want to understand the dynamics, the new dynamics of the African American community. And I just want to say one thing, the 3 F's. We are a faithful institution based on Quran and Sunnah. We are an institution that is forward-looking, trying to deal with issues that we have in our community at the master's level. And we have a relationship with National Islam where anybody who comes to the Islamic Seminary of America and is qualified, they get accepted, they don't have to pay any tuition. They're free.
Give that title to you, I want what we qualified for.
So thank you so much for always welcoming me here to National Islam. May Allah have mercy on us all. May it make us not a trial for one another. May He make us a mercy from one another. May He save us all from the hellfire. Save us all from the hellfire. Save us all from the hellfire.
Amen.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Takbir.